Welcome to the Code with Jason meetup. Here's what we're going to be looking at today. Um, so, uh, Getting us up to speed on here's an update on where we're at with everything. Um, I got my first paying customer onboarded, and he had onboarding my first customer revealed some weaknesses in the platform. SaturnCI, the continuous integration platform that I'm building. Um, there were some performance weaknesses. I addressed those issues, got his performance to where it needed to be, and now the ball is in his court to get his migration to the platform completed. So that part has been addressed, and now I'm turning my attention to what it's going to take to get other users, other customers on the platform because I have other people lined up and waiting. They're just waiting on me to give them what they need. Um, One thing that a number of my potential customers need is the ability for multiple users to be able to use the platform. Right now, if you're a one person team, it's good, but if you have two or more people, it's not going to work for you because there's no way to invite other people and collaborate and stuff like that. You would think that adding more users might be a relatively straightforward thing. That's what I thought. Turns out it's not really. So today we can kind of get into the reasons why that's not as simple as you might think and how I'm thinking about maybe addressing this. So one of the reasons why it's not as straightforward as you might think is because the fact that Saturn CI integrates with GitHub means that um, means that the degree to which the conceptual model of Saturn CI is not harmonious with the conceptual model of GitHub, um, it's going to be a problem. The more harmonious I can make those two things, the smoother of a time I'm going to have with everything. That doesn't mean I have to be, that doesn't mean my conceptual model has to match GitHub's or that I have to let them dictate the way that I do everything. But I don't want to clash. Um, so let's talk a little bit about GitHub's model. I've discovered that GitHub has three kinds of accounts. They have user accounts, organization accounts, and something called enterprise accounts. And right now, I have this concept of GitHub accounts in Saturn CI, but I think it's a little bit muddy. Um, I'm conflating some ideas right now that I think should be separate. Um, and I need to tidy up this conceptual model that I have here. So the way that this works is when you say add account, it takes you to this familiar screen. Um, but notice how I clicked a button that says add account, and then the screen I'm presented with, it says install Saturn CI development. That's the name of this GitHub app is Saturn CI development. So I clicked add account, but then what happens is it's inviting me to create an installation. So that's not exactly the same thing. And then if I do create an installation, what would happen is another one of these gray rectangles would appear and it would show me the account where I installed the app. And we can see that there's a GitHub installation ID for each one of these. And so there's a very tight link between an installation of the SaturnCI GitHub app and a GitHub account. So that's one way in which I'm conflating these two distinct concepts. So I think I'm going to want to do something about that. What exactly I'm going to do about that, I don't think we need to get into yet. Um, but I think we can say with a pretty high degree of certainty that the way it is now is not going to work out great. Um, and so I had some thoughts for how I could tackle this thing in general, because this is kind of I found it a tough thing to come at. But I had an idea. So if I go to GitHub, Saturn CI is an organization. And actually, okay, so we have like three repositories in this organization. Um, and I had some difficulty because you can collaborate with somebody on a project in multiple different ways. Like you can have an organization and you can invite somebody into your same organization, or you can just have a GitHub repo and you can invite somebody to that same repo, but there's nothing to do with an organization. So my question to myself was, how do I how do I model this in a way that's comprehensible and that's again harmonious with the conceptual model of GitHub? And so what I wanted to do was just kind of get some background information. Like I didn't have a really firm understanding of the various concepts in GitHub. And so I wanted to get a better understanding of all that because I figured maybe if I have this background knowledge, it'll help me figure out how to move forward somehow. So if I just go to one of these repos, test runner agent, for example, I can go, I think, to settings and then to collaborators and teams. Apparently, I need to do this stuff. Bear with me a second here. Okay. I went to collaborators and teams. And here I have a list theoretically of everybody who has access to this repository, I think. Um, and I still don't understand all the concepts in GitHub's like user model because in addition to organizations, there is something called teams.
Yeah, and the so a team is like a group of users. A team can be substituted usually where you use a specific user, and that would apply whatever the implied permission set is to all the users in that team.
Okay.
The a complicating thing here is that teams can be nested
Okay, interesting.
arbitrarily deep.
And I assume that a team can either be associated with an organization or not.
So, I don't know like what scope teams are defined at. You'd probably have to consult the GitHub API that would probably tell you, but I think they're specific to the organization.
Okay.
Yeah. The way we use them is we have our people, so we have 30 plus people on our organization. And then within that, we have probably about 14 different teams that are clusters of people that work on specific projects or specific languages. And then we drop that team as the collaborator or the to give them rights to a repo. Um, Owners have rights to everything in your organization, all the repos within your organization. But the teams you can assign like maintenance. And then when you drop that team in, let's say you have 5 people on that team, have maintenance level access to that repository. And then you can give one person, if you want, outside of that, a higher level, like an admin access or a CI access.
Yeah, I think each user effectively has three possible levels of access. I think it's guest, which gives them like read access, collaborator, which gives them write access, and then owner, which gives them additional permissions to like delete, update, create repositories within. Well, so I guess there's the at the repo level, I forget what owner gives you, but at the organization level, they have the same similar distinction, and it you get like the ability to create repositories if you're an owner or an admin. I forget what the term is at the organization level.
Yeah. And that includes things like who can approve a PR, who can push and set up a PR. I mean, there's a whole
Right.
list of
And
access.
so I think what you're going after here is for a repository, you need to get like the full list of users, and for each one of them, what their access to that repository is, what their authorization level, I guess, whether it's guest, collaborator, or owner.
Yeah, and in the beginning, I was thinking there's two ways I can do this. Um, One way is to just delegate all the access control to GitHub, and the other way would be to have the access control happen within SaturnCI and have it independent of GitHub. And the deeper I get into this, the more sure I am that I want to delegate it all to GitHub and not independently handle it on the Saturn CI side.
I think that's right. Like, of course, you'll need, your user management on Saturn CI, and you want to link that to their account on GitHub, but then use GitHub to look up for a repository who has access to that repository.
Hmm.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it would make sense like um if I were to invite Rick to this Panda project, um then how do I even get to it? My goodness. Okay. If I were to invite Rick to this Panda project, then I would need to give Rick access to Panda in GitHub, but then I would think that I would kick off the Saturn CI invite from Saturn CI.
Um, Another way might maybe, and I don't know if this ends up being the same thing in the end, is you add him, like you said, step one's the same. You would go into GitHub and add his GitHub user, give his GitHub user access to your repository. And then in Saturn CI, when he logs in uh, to his account that he's already linked to his GitHub identity, then those things would just show up for him without you having to come into Saturn CI and invite him.
Yeah, I guess the Saturn CI invite only makes sense for the first Saturn CI project they ever get invited to.
Well, but then you're not inviting them to a project. You're inviting them to Saturn CI, right?
Good
They
point.
you want them to come and create an account in Saturn CI and link it to their GitHub account. And at that point, anything they have permission to that's in Saturn CI should show up for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and right now, okay. Yeah, let's think about this. Right now, okay, what happens if I click add project? Does it even work at all? Oh, yeah, it does. Okay. So if I go back to GitHub, go to the SaturnCI organization and repositories. So we see these three repos, SaturnCI, Test Runner Agent, and website. Um, so
Okay.
here we see those exact same three. So when I click on add project, I'm presented with all the repos in that organization, or more precisely, I'm presented with all the repos in this account. Um, and I can choose to add any of these as Saturn CI projects. Um, but maybe that's not the most logical way for it to work.
In the system that we built at our last company where we did this kind of integration, we try to remember, we didn't have this notion of a necessarily of a project, or it was like a little bit differently. It was a pipeline, and it's like different than like I'm not 100% sure what project means in Saturn CI. Maybe you could explain that because I'm
I'm,
trying to map the concepts together and I'm not. So is
yeah.
a project a mapping to a GitHub repo or a project? I'm
Ooh,
not
this
sure.
is interesting.
That's like
Sorry,
a project management
I'll
thing.
I'll get to your question, but I didn't actually realize that there's a separate concept in GitHub called a project. So yeah, basically in Saturn CI, a project is one to one with a repo.
Okay,
Yeah, and GitHub's concept of a project is equivalent of a Jira board,
right.
Okay.
which is also it's also one-to-one to the repo.
Okay. So maybe what I'm currently calling a project in Saturn CI, I really should be calling a repository.
Because
Is
Saturn
there ever a
CI,
case where you'll have like a mono repo that has multiple pipelines or multiple builds? I don't know
I
what the
think
right
we
word
can
in Saturn
say,
CI is.
yeah, I think we can say no.
Okay.
so
Then yeah, why
Saturn
not just call it a repo then? That would certainly eliminate some confusion.
Yeah. Sorry, Rick, you were saying something?
Saturn CI is added to, for example, my repo, right? I'm not adding my repo to Saturn CI.
Let's see. You would install the Saturn CI GitHub app on your account, and then you would also add your repo to Saturn CI in Saturn CI.
Okay.
But on this page, it would show his account, like his GitHub ID, where you have Saturn CI, Jason Sweat. His would be whatever his
Mm-hmm.
GitHub username is. And then he would have his projects under there he could potentially add, right?
Yes, I think so.
So my point was to say that was that you don't add, I maybe I misunderstood by what you meant by you add your projects to Saturn CI, Rick.
I was so I was trying to think if I'm in my project, do I have a GitHub app that is Saturn CI, or does Saturn CI have access to my GitHub repo? And in that case, if I added Saturn CI, would I individually select repos, or could I add all, 256 repos that my organization currently sits on?
You add them one at a time. At least that's the way it works now.
Okay.
unless you know the author, and then maybe he'll help you out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so I think maybe this like way of thinking about it is not the greatest. Um, hmm.
I'm going to share a documentation page in the chat as soon as I find it. Here it is. This is the tool that we used in Yahoo, and that page that I just linked you to is their access control documentation for this tool. This documentation, I gotta say, really sucks.
Okay.
That said, this tool is lot like GitHub Actions, more like GitHub Actions than what you're building,
Mm-hmm.
but it does like use uh, basically go it implements what you're going after, which is using the uh, GitHub GitHub for authentication and authorization to the different builds.
Okay.
And this page just kind of it's not a very good page. Probably leave some stuff out, but it gives you an idea for how they did the mapping.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, and coming back to this, okay, I'm gonna go away from that because I don't want to bias myself with what's there. It's like I feel like there should be a place. Hmm. Okay, maybe let's make a distinction between like an admin user and a member, an owner and a member. Maybe that's the GitHub terminology.
Yeah, members though, I think there's like a read only and a collaborator level.
Actually, I should say that different. Um, let's talk about a Saturn CI admin versus a regular Saturn CI user. So if I'm the person, there's only going to be one person who installs the Saturn CI GitHub app on an account. And that person will hold the keys to Saturn CI. Something coming through in the chat. Oh wow. Oh, this is the GitHub.
That's GitHub's repository roles that they have on an organization.
Got
Uh,
okay.
and that's how they break it down.
Okay. Okay.
Right. And there's slightly different terminology when you look at the same thing applied to repos. If you want, or this does say repository roles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Um, so you can be a Saturn CI admin user because there's going to be one user who installs the Saturn CI GitHub app on an account. Um, and that person, just by virtue of the fact that they were able to do that, if they're going to do that on Saturn CI, they must have had the permissions in GitHub to install a GitHub app.
Right.
So they don't need to have any kind of special denotation in Saturn CI necessarily.
That's right.
Um,
Same thing in this app screwdriver. There was like in screwdriver itself, there's regular users and admin users are not what we're talking about here. They're like the Jason Sweat of Saturn CI, right? You get to go in and administer your installation of Saturn CI, the
mhm.
web app. Okay, but there was only, other than that, regular users. You mapped it to your GitHub account, and it, depending upon your GitHub account's uh, authorization level to the repository, depended upon what you could do. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think I remember seeing this too in like Circle CI when I used it, or one of those other ones, I forget. But it's like, well, you can go like list repositories in some cases, but if you tried to install the hook that they want you to install, it would either fail or they would just say you don't have the permissions to do that.
Mm-hmm. Right, that makes sense. Um, okay. And then to make it a little easier on the mind, let's I'll imagine that I'm just a user. I'm not the kind of user who installed a GitHub app on an account. Just a regular user. Um, and let's say I've been on GitHub, I have access to SaturnCI and Panda, those two different projects. Um, when I log into SaturnCI, it seems like, okay, so let's say in GitHub, I have access to 1,000 different repos. Obviously, out of those 1,000 repos, only a very small minority of those are going to be associated with SaturnCI. Um, so it probably doesn't make sense to me, or it probably doesn't make sense to display like all 1,000 repos that you potentially could connect with SaturnCI theoretically. It probably makes more sense to just to show you the ones that already have been connected to SaturnCI.
Yeah, that's the way this tool worked. And
Mhm.
it didn't work at the organization or account level at all. It's like you added repositories and it just kept track of repositories. It didn't bother itself with the next level up. Other than that, it displayed it. So you know
Um,
where the repository came from.
and it seems like if somebody else on my team is already using Saturn CI, like somebody else has already set up my repo on Saturn CI, and then I log into Saturn CI for the
You
first
should see
time,
it. Yeah.
I should see it.
Let me think about that. I don't think that's the way it was in this tool by default. It's like you added it for your user. No, that wasn't the case. Other users who had access to it could go to it, but by default, like the list of uh, pipelines that I could see were from repositories that I added by like that's what it listed. And I could link to other ones. Like if somebody gave me a link to a repository that I could access, I would be able to open that link.
Okay. Um, I can imagine cases where that would make sense. Maybe if there's just a large volume of repositories that one has access to, you wouldn't want to see them all on a list.
Our GitHub had, you know, over 130,000 repositories. And in the screwdriver build system, there was probably, 50,000 pipelines in one instance of this. And I don't know how many, I guess it was, I don't know, 10,000 engineers,
Wow.
say. So, it's like one installation of this tool handled all that. And it used this permission system, I think is the more important part that I'm getting at is like it seemed to work,
Hmm.
but it was definitely your scale may make you make different decisions on the things you were just talking about what to show by default.
Right. Like, I think if I fast forward a few months, I can imagine that my biggest customers will have in the neighborhood of one repo total. And so I don't need to worry about the system getting overwhelmed by a really long list. Okay. So when I log in, I'm presented with a list of all the projects to which All the projects. Okay, I gotta stop saying project. I gotta start saying repo. For all the repos in GitHub to which I have access, for all the repos in GitHub where I have access and a Saturn CI project already exists for that repo, then I should see that repo show up in SaturnCI. And mechanically, how does that happen? Hmm. You know, the GitHub permissions are subject to change.
Yeah.
So I don't think I can just go off of the fact that a project exists in Saturn CI that I had access to at the beginning of time. Um, obviously, I don't have to necessarily I don't necessarily have to consult GitHub every single time a request is made or anything like that, but the GitHub permissions certainly have to be taken into account.
Yeah, you can't cache them, I think is what you're trying to say. You can't cache them on the Saturn CI side because they could change at any time.
Yeah, or at least I can't cache them for any meaningful period of time. Like maybe if they're 5 minutes out of date, that's okay. I don't know. Maybe I don't want to cache them at all. It's probably simpler if I don't cache them. It's probably a detail I
Unless
shouldn't even
it's
be thinking
possible
about.
to, unless it's possible to have a hook or whatever it would be called in GitHub side that allows you to, every time there's a user change, you get notified.
Yeah. But let's leave caching out of the picture for now. That page could load. I'll ask GitHub what repos do I have access to, and then out of those, which ones have an instance in Saturn CI. And for those ones, that's what I see.
That makes sense.
Okay. Um, and right now, this view, it's a very account-centric view. And I've always felt like that was like not quite right. Like, because, okay, let's add a project here. I think I have one that will run on Saturn CI. This page loads very slowly because it's getting it all from GitHub every time. And this account has a lot of repos. Okay, whoops, it's called Panda. Okay, I will start this one.
So as soon as you click the link that added it,
As soon as I click the link that added it.
the
Oh, yeah,
click
correct.
on the page with the list. Okay.
Um, okay. So I have exactly two repos in Saturn CI, but if I look at this page, that's not really immediately evident. And switching among projects is kind of inelegant because it's like I want to go to Saturn CI, I got to click this link. If I want to go to Panda, I got to click this link. It feels inappropriate that I have to zero in on such a small link. Like
Yeah. I,
99% of the time, this link and this link are the only things I care about on this page.
right. So again, this way our other system handled it was you're presented with a list of repos effectively. And in fact, there was you could make have favorites, so you could go to a favorites page, like so the you may have 100 projects in here
Mm-hmm.
with the pipelines, but you're only working on five or something like that.
Yeah, okay.
And they even made it so you could build custom. It was like they not only had favorites, but then they allowed you to group them, so you could go to a group and just see the things in that group, which is pretty handy because it's like, oh, now I'm switching to work with this team and their
Hmm.
15 builds and are, you know,
Okay. Okay. Well, I think okay, so even before I get into like the ability to invite users and stuff like that, I think I want to change how I'm conceiving of all this. And instead of having this default page, when you click Saturn CI, it takes you here. So rather than having this like default Saturn CI page be the GitHub accounts page, I don't even know if this page is going to make sense at all anymore. But instead of the default being this, I think I want the default to be a repositories page. So maybe let's add that. Okay, and I'll add a route for it. And we only need index. Okay, index could not be found. Missing a template. Okay, authorization not performed. Um, let's do this. Repositories equals current user dot repositories. Then we can do authorize repositories. Okay, undefined method repositories for an instance of user, of course, because we have no concept of repositories because it's misnamed right now. It's called projects. So let's do this. Let's stash this stuff. Let's go to projects. Let's go to repository.rb. So we can do this. We can move this to here. Okay, so basically I just renamed project to repository, but the name of project will keep working everywhere still. Um, but I bet that that is actually not going to work because there's no table called repositories. So we can say table name. Um, no, it's like self dot table name, something like that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I did something wrong. Test suite runs dot repository ID. Huh. I got to remember how I did this because I've had to rename basically every model in this application. So let's go to build and test suite run. So the old name is build, the new name is test suite run. So I made build inherit from test suite run, similar to how I'm making project inherit from repository. Oh, I know how I did it. Okay. I did a migration first, I believe. So I'll do this. Rails generate migration, rename um, projects to repositories. Okay. And that will, of course, cause all kinds of things to not work. But we can do this. We can go to projects and say self.table name equals repositories.
You have to get rid of that where you added it in repositories, the self.table name.
Sorry.
You added the self.table name into the repository class as well. Do you need to take that out? Or did you already take it out and I didn't see?
Oh, I already took out the entire repository
Oh,
class.
sorry, you did a reset. Got it, got it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll create a new branch. Rename projects table to repositories, and I'll commit this. Okay. And by the way, I have this cool new thing going on. Um, Let me see, test runners. Um, instead of instead of each run provisioning a new machine, a new virtual machine, there's just a pool of available machines. And when you start a run, it'll just draw from that pool. Although if there's an hour of inactivity, it'll delete all the runners.
Mm.
So there's no active pool right now. So it's provisioning these new machines right now.
So when you're done with the run, does it return it to the pool or does it just get rid of it?
Just gets rid of it and provisions some new ones.
And do you provision it at the when you take it out or so like soon as you take one out of the pool to use and start using it,
Yeah, it's like a one for one.
provisions?
It's like a take a penny, leave a penny.
Okay.
Um, yeah, when you take one out of the pool, you'll add two new ones. Um, okay, but things are apparently not working. Um, these two that just got provisioned, defaced leg and wrinkled blanket, they're in an error state. Um, and now two more are getting provisioned, embarrassed piano and blazing librarian. Um, and who knows what's going to happen with those. Okay, so now embarrassed piano and blazing librarian are in a running state. Okay, and they appear to be working. So I don't know what happened with those two that went into an error state, but I've designed this to be kind of fault tolerant. So apparently it recovered from whatever its issue was. And now, okay, so I remember now that I have my pool size set to 4. So when it provisioned these two when it started using these two runners, it's like, okay, now there's 0 in the pool. So to bring the pool size back to 4, we need to provision 4 new ones. So now we have Intolerable Donut, Green Eyeball, Vicious Cupcake, and Rabid Cowboy. Okay. Okay, and now our tests are in fact running. And I'm going to check on Panda. This isn't good. It's just stuck and running. So I'm just going to delete this. Okay. Um, but if this passes just fine, I will merge it, which it did. So I will merge. Okay. And now that we have a pool, this this run should go a little faster. Should be able to get started just immediately. Yeah, it's starting immediately. So this one took 3 minutes, 50 seconds. This one might take a bit less time, maybe more like 3 minutes. Okay. Um, Now let's add our repository class. Okay, we're not ready for this yet. And we don't need table name equals repositories because that is the default. Okay, this does not work. I wonder what happens if I restart my Rails server. Nothing. Okay. Test suite runs.repository ID does not exist. I don't know why I'm having this issue in this case when I didn't have it in any previous cases.
Yeah, your migration just renamed the table, right? It didn't rename any of the fields within the table.
Right.
So wouldn't there be a project or no? Or
Well,
the
anything
error
that
makes sense to
referred
me
to
based
the
on that. Yeah,
anything that referred to the project would have project ID as a foreign key. Now
correct.
it's
That's what I'm.
repository ID.
Yeah, for whatever it's worth, for other ones that I renamed, I still did have the outdated column names. So I'm surprised that that makes a difference in this case, but it didn't make a difference in these other cases. But let's look.
Well, you say you made a project, or you're renaming project repository, but aren't there a bunch of references to the project model still? Or things named project?
Yeah, but for example, where I renamed build to test suite run, there's still a bunch of references to build and it works just fine.
Or because of the model, because of the derived model?
Okay, so I'm going to do this same thing yet again. Okay, and where might this be coming from? Okay, so on this page, we're fine. But in this page, we're not. But there's not like a specific place where we can see that that's coming from.
Did you update, like I noticed in your, like you specific, like for the build ID, you
Mhm.
specifically said that the relationship was called, like you were explicit about it. The relationship was test suite runs, but the field was build ID. Do you need to go to the where you have the relationships defined?
Yeah,
See
good
what I mean?
question. Yeah,
So do you have
Yeah,
to go where you have the project relationship defined and say that it's project ID?
test suite
I can,
run. Okay, so it belongs to
right, it's a,
project.
the foreign key. You specified the foreign key and it has many.
No, it's not repository ID. Um,
You're gonna have to specify, I think you're gonna have to specify the foreign key as project ID, even though it feels redundant, because the model's now called repository and the table is called repository, and Rails might be then making the foreign key repository ID.
I'm skeptical of that. Yeah, that didn't do it. Because in this case, it belongs to his test suite run and the foreign key is build ID. So this is a case where they don't match. And bear with me a second. We just hit the end of the hour. My wife is texting me. I want to make sure that we're still good on time. Um, okay. I think we're good for a couple more minutes at least. Um, column repository ID does not exist. So something on test suite runs is looking for repository ID, which is surprising because surely nowhere am I doing a test suite run dot repository.
well, it's probably something that's accessing the test suite runs or do you access it from project?
Do I
Do
access
you access test suite runs from project?
probably?
Here, I would guess that this is the call that's closing it up. I don't know how to fix it, but
Yeah.
pretty sure this is the one.
Well, let's try this. Let's see what it says about that. Nope. Yeah, that is most certainly not it. Um, okay, let's think through this a little bit more. Okay, so what we don't have is a concrete explanation for why this error is occurring. That might be a good place to start. Oh, I know how we can advance toward that. So this URL is project slash blah blah blah. So that must be the project show page. Um, so if we do this, do we get an error that says test, or do we get the same one? Okay, we get an error that says test. I didn't even have to delete this other stuff. Okay.
I mean, one way to test this would be to go into the console, load that project, and then hit the test runs relationship.
Yeah, and I think before we even do that, I have a hunch. If I move raise test from here to here, do we get this error back? We do. Okay. And if we move it just above,
Yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. Is that's the
yeah.
test suite runs method on project that's causing the problem.
Yeah. So let's reproduce that. Yep. At least probably yep. Yep. Okay. Um, so it's like this like inverse relationship is not working right. Let's try this.
Is there not a foreign key definition on has many?
What do you mean?
Where you define the foreign key in the other table or has many?
So that
Yeah,
foreign
like
key
that.
calculation could be getting messed up because of the naming. It doesn't know that there was an inverse there. Belongs to project is now repository, and it might not be able to figure out.
I think when we did the before when we did the foreign key and tried it and it didn't work, we put it here, but I think it really belongs in the has many on the project
Yeah, I
or
think you're right.
repository.
I think we have to tell it somehow that when test suite run refers back to repository, it's supposed to go not off of repository ID, but project
Proper
ID.
Yeah, so I think you just add the foreign key here. Nope, it's somewhere.
Huh. Let's let's do this just to be extra sure. Okay.
Aha.
All right.
Now
And
you're in
then
your
maybe we have to restart the server for this to work.
well, it gave a different error.
Um, Still says test suite runs dot
Oh, good.
repository ID does not exist, but we're getting it in a different place.
Right.
We're getting it on test case run show. So let's look at that.
I would bet it would still be in the same place that we corrected the other one, right? Whatever, any other has many relationships in
Oh yeah, you're probably
repository.
right. Test suite run. Huh, but it's test suite run still.
Well,
Okay,
go back to your code for the repository model.
this?
Yeah. So I think it's the yeah, I don't know, but it seems
Is
like
it the
it would be the same thing for all the has manys.
right?
Maybe.
Yeah, but I don't know which has many it would be because this isn't telling us. It's only telling us test suite runs dot repository ID, which is the one we already fixed.
But I think uh, you fixed when you say project dot runs, but if you go back to your code, there's other places here, like for instance, I bet maybe in the runs or the builds relationship here. My guess is both of those are going to need the foreign key project ID,
Yeah, I think you're probably
may-
right.
maybe even project secrets, but I think my guess would be well, I don't know which one solves that particular error, honestly.
Yeah, before I try to apply a fix, I want to get an explanation of why we're getting this error.
Yeah.
So we can use the same technique. Hmm. Okay. So test suite run component. Let's go there. Okay. I'm just going to blank out this whole template. Okay. And what if we do that? Okay. What if we do this? And what if we do this?
It,
Okay.
I think it's, yeah, the test suite runs list, right? Oh,
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
Test suite run list HTML. Okay, and if we blank this out, no problem. Okay. Um, okay, there it is. Okay, test suite run list dot builds dot any. Okay. Project dot builds. Okay. So this is outdated language. We can clean all this up. You should be called test suite runs. Initial chunk of builds. Okay, initial chunk of test suite runs. Okay. So apparently we just needed to switch to this different model.
Mm.
Okay, but I don't really want to mix these two refactorings together. So I think what I want to do is put this refactoring here in one commit and then come back and replay this refactoring on repository for yet another time. But it seems like that might be the one that'll finally work. But we're at quarter after. Um, we should probably wrap it up now. Um, so let's wrap it up. Um, and I'll get this situated. Let's see. Let's do a quick recap. We were trying to figure out how to add new users, and in doing so, we realized that this page doesn't make a lot of sense, and we want to add a new page with a list of repositories. It'd be very easy just to call it projects and have a list of projects, but I don't want to dig myself a deeper hole and commit myself more to this name of projects when I already know that it's wrong. So I want to have the discipline to go back and correct this name from project to repository, and that is, of course, generating some cleanup work that we'll have to do before we can proceed. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining me, and I will see you next time.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks all.